Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed the morning's conference. And now we'll move into the last stage of the conference. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce this afternoon's panel. This afternoon, we're going to switch from sort of a national security interest to something that I'm very confident you know more about than I do, which is social media. So this afternoon's theme is social media, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Our moderator today is distinctly qualified to lead the discussion. Dr. Mark Bauerlein is a professor of English at Emory University in Atlanta. He is the author of The Dumbest Generation and editor of The Digital Divide, Arguments for and against Facebook, Google, texting, and the age of social networking. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bauerlein to the stage.
Thank you. All right. It's great to be here. I've enjoyed walking across campus and soaking up the feel. Different campuses have different feels to them. This one is unique. I did a magazine story a few years ago on the Citadel in West Point, sitting in on the classes and the curriculum, and found myself drawn to the focus and the rigor and the discipline, especially since I have a 10-year-old boy who could really use a lot more of that. All right. So we have a lively panel today on a pressing topic of social media, good and bad. As you know that I highlight from the title of the book, actually the full title of the book that really underscores the bad is The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future, or Don't Trust Anyone Under 30. That's the full title of that book. And it really emphasizes the ways in which social media in particular are drawing young people away from the better intellectual and social pursuits. That's something we can talk about in the talks and in the Q&A afterwards, and there'll be a lot of time for you to raise questions. Anyway, we have three figures who come from different backgrounds to address the issue. First will be Caitlin Dewey, who is a reporter at the Washington Post. And being a reporter at a major newspaper, you really are at the center of a lot of the transformations that are taking place in media and communications these days. The Post itself has undergone some major upheavals in recent years. And journalism in general is completely different today than it was just 10 years ago. She's also their digital culture critic, and so she weighs in regularly on a lot of interesting issues that pop up. Here are some titles of recent columns that she has done. One, The Dark Side of Going Viral That No One Talks About. This is what happens when someone decides an internet hoax is art. The Twitter meme so stupid that we literally can't make sense of it. So I'd urge you to go ahead and type her in and see what she posts. Caitlin, do you have Twitter feeds? Yeah. Okay. So follow her. Okay. All journalists have Twitter feeds these days, of course. And we have John Tribus joining us here, coming in. He actually has a fair background in marketing experience and the industry, beyond the college campus. He's advised industries like Tiffany and Coca-Cola on how to advance social change. He's worked with environmentalist Jane Goodall. He even had a post at the British Embassy recently, but now he is at Georgetown University, where he heads the Center for Social Impact Communications, and he's probably going to talk about some of the work that they are doing there. Finally, we have Professor Vera Heuer, who is already known to you here in the departments as a professor of international studies and political science. She conducts research on political contention And today, there really isn't much material for her to talk about in America with political contention. So anyway, she teaches a course on riots, protests, and social movements, and she's guided student research on social media, and in particular the Occupy movement. So I'm tempted to go ahead and turn it over to them, but first, let me just mention one broad contrast regarding social media. Social media have the potential to bring people together who can't otherwise connect. People who are in remote places can form little virtual communities and understand things and learn from one another. One can open up to the world in a way one never could before. There's more information and knowledge available to young people than ever before. And this is, of course, what all the schools and the cultural zones are trying to encourage. And then we have, however, all these other patterns of behavior through social media, online, and I'm just going to mention one of them, and you know what those are. You hear about them all the time, but this was a study that just came out last month, and it's called The Spreading of Misinformation Online. And what it documented, 4 researchers looked at patterns of sharing information on social media when issues, political conspiracy issues, come up. And what they found is that people more and more isolate themselves in niche communities. And what those communities are based upon is shared belief, right? Now, the problem with creating a community of shared belief is you end up with too much confirmation bias, as it's called. You get reinforced so often in your belief that you start letting your beliefs affect your judgment of the evidence that comes in. Things you agree with, that's true. Things you disagree with, that's false or immoral. And the thing is, this always happens in any closed communities in a society. But what the web has done is not open the communities up, but actually reinforced this process of making little niches of the like-minded. And the danger of that is that misinformation can travel, can get sedimented, because it does satisfy the group beliefs. And again, this always happens, but on the web, where you can go to websites that reinforce what you think, you can listen to commentators articulating what you believe, you harden. Okay? You don't learn more, you start building walls up against contrary opinions and disconfirming evidence. And that is the real problem. Not that there is misinformation online. There's misinformation all the time in human communication, but that people can groove their inputs so much that, again, they become overly prejudiced, prejudging everything. And so when people start accepting misinformation online, it's very hard to expose it as misinformation. It's very hard to get people to change their minds when they can always go to places that reinforce what they believe. And so the web, which is such a dynamic, fluid environment, has this paradoxical influence on many people in which it makes them non-flexible, right? Non-fluid. They, again, become sedimented, grooved in what they think. And this is particularly a problem when there is demonstrably false information out there. So the challenge for a lot of teachers and cultural leaders, journalists, is to try to break open that hardening process, right? To get you to read other things. Don't just create your daily me, where the websites you go to are exactly what you expect all the time. They tally with your political beliefs. You know, If you're conservative, read a few liberal magazines. It's painful, but something that you should, just to know what is being said. And the opposite, too little of that happens. Listen to the other side, not as a kind of soft and fuzzy, oh, I want to be tolerant of other things, but actually just to be exposed, just to know what the other side is saying. It opens you up. I talk to conservatives and I say to them, you got to read Karl Marx. Okay? You've got to know what Marx's arguments were. You have to know them better than your liberal antagonists. So this is the thing that we have to try to push against, again, the avalanche of social media that it does simply offer you reinforcement for existing belief. And so that's what I take as my challenge in the classroom and in a lot of my writings. That said, let's turn it over to our three panelists. We're going to go in the order here from Caitlin over. So, Caitlin, do it.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me at VMI today. I have to say I'm learning as much from this conference as I imagine many of you are. For starters, I've learned that I need to be way more paranoid about my internet use. I'm going to put a sticker on my smartphone camera ASAP. I've also learned far more about drone strikes than any reporter for the style section should ever have to know. And I've also learned, courtesy of a little app called Yik Yak, which I know some of you have. I have learned some very interesting things about life here on Post. For instance, I discovered that yesterday's keynote speaker infringed quite egregiously on your lunch hour, which makes me very relieved that our panel is after lunch. Now, the reason I bring up Yik Yak is because I want to spend about 10 minutes talking to you guys a little bit about anonymity on social media, why it's important, why we should fight for it, and why, like most otherwise wonderful things on the internet, it should occasionally terrify us and make us question our faith in humanity. So first things first, I want to briefly explain Yik Yak for those of you in the audience over the age of 24. I think I'm speaking to these 5 people in the third row of the red section. So Yik Yak is essentially an anonymous message board that you access via your phone. I like to call it the equivalent of the dive bar bathroom that everyone can write on. You know, like that wall in the dive bar, it is absolutely anonymous. You can write what you want on it with a pretty high degree of confidence that no one's going to trace it back to you. It's also very local. When you look at Yik Yak, you know that the messages you're seeing are coming from people who are geographically close to you. Now, whenever I speak to people your age, my age, they just sort of assume that Yik Yak is an awesome thing. They don't know why anyone else would ever question it. When I speak to adults of a certain older generation, the first question I always get from them is like, why? Like, why would anyone want to use this? Like, if you can't say it under your real name, it must be terrible. How could it possibly be worth saying? Honestly, there is some truth to that, which we will get to later. But anonymity is also a tool with a number of discrete and very valuable uses, right? A number of academics have done a great deal of work into the social and psychological consequences of anonymity online. And they found that the ability to speak without consequence to your real-life identity can be a very empowering tool for expression. So for instance, people tend to be way more creative when they're anonymous than they would be otherwise. I know nothing about military acronyms or lingo, but I can tell you guys are making some pretty clever jokes on Yik Yak from time to time, right? Groups also tend to experience better cohesion when individuals in them are anonymous. That's because people tend to get, less hung up on things like their identity and their reputation. And this can be particularly powerful if you're a member of a group that, has traditionally been marginalized or persecuted by the society that you're operating in. So for instance, I'm working on a story right now in which I'm speaking to a lot of Iranian people via Reddit. The first reaction I usually get, certainly when I told my editor about that, was, how are Iranians on Reddit? Isn't Reddit blocked in Iran? That is the case, but people are able to use anonymizing technologies like Tor and VPN to access the site. And then once they're on it, they're using a pseudonym. So they're able to sort of like engage in the type of political and critical speech that they wouldn't be able to engage in otherwise. So that's obviously a really powerful thing across the board. And there's also there's a secondary benefit here as far as privacy is concerned, right? Which is that anonymity frees you from your own digital trail or your own digital footprint. I tend to hear a lot from parents. There's like a great deal of moral panic, like, oh God, the kids these days are doing so many stupid things on their smartphones, like they're never gonna get a job in 10 years. I can confirm that the kids these days are indeed doing stupid things on their smartphones, but they're doing it on anonymous apps where, no hiring manager is ever gonna see it. Not what most parents want to hear about what their children are doing online, but it's actually very savvy and they're certainly protecting themselves and their privacy. Seriously though, in all seriousness, there are some real harms with anonymity that we definitely need to talk about, because it doesn't just free people from the sorts of social consequences and judgments that hold them back, it also frees them from the sorts of social norms and behavioral rules that keep us functioning as a society. And without those norms, psychologists have found, people sometimes behave very anti-socially. That is in a way that's actually destructive to sort of like group cohesion and that sort of thing. And there's actually a name for this, which you've probably encountered yourself, and it's called the online disinhibition effect. The idea that people don't have any inhibitions online. It's basically why sites like 4chan devolve into like cesspools of racism and other grossness. And it's why no Twitter egg has ever said anything intelligent ever. So over the past couple years in particular, researchers have found that the online disinhibition effect manifests itself in some pretty unpleasant ways. If you look in the comment section of a news website, for instance, something that I personally try never to do, you'll find that the anonymous comments are about twice as likely to be uncivil as the ones that people leave under their real name. And researchers have also found that in online discussions, people who are anonymous tend to behave more aggressively towards other people and with far less empathy than they would otherwise. Sometimes this just comes down to sort of like teasing and nastiness, like schoolyard meanness that we would see offline. Social media doesn't really have a direct sort of impact on that. But we have seen on apps like Yik Yak, which has been in the news a lot lately, that this sort of aggression and lack of empathy can escalate to really serious stuff. So there was actually a period of time last year when Yik Yak was averaging one new bomb threat per university or college campus every 2 weeks. This is one app. Every 2 weeks, there's a serious bomb threat that's being called into authorities, investigations are launched, et cetera. And that's just the really high-profile stuff, right? It's so common for cyberbullying, personal threats, and hate speech to go down on Yik Yak that last October, a coalition of more than 70 civil rights groups approached the Department of Education, and they argued that Yik Yak infringed on the rights of women, students of color, and other minorities to such a degree that the Department of Education should step in and do something. Now, you are obviously a very upstanding and disciplined group of young people, but lest you think that VMI does not see this same sort of anonymous bad behavior, I can assure you that's not the case. I've been browsing Yik Yak intermittently since I arrived on post on Sunday, and guys, don't clap, this isn't complimentary. I was unsurprised, but still pretty grossed out to see some of the explicitly sexist and sexual remarks that were made about other female panelists who have spoken at this conference. So, what is to be done about this? That's the big question, right? How can we maximize the benefits of anonymity on platforms like Yik Yak while also minimizing the harms? Well, frankly, I think those are questions that both platforms and individual users are still working out. But a good compromise seems to be emerging on some platforms where users are allowed to or even encouraged to be anonymous, but frameworks are also put in place to protect from any fallout or negative consequences. So on Twitter, for instance, that platform is host to a whole lot of anonymous trolls. And as a result, it's had a very serious problem with harassment and abuse. Recently, Twitter has strengthened its harassment rules to protect against that. And it's also begun rolling out and testing filters that will restrict the reach of tweets that come from suspicious anonymous accounts. Very interested to see how that works out. There's another site called Ask.fm. You guys are a little old for it. It's very popular among like high school and middle school age kids. Young adults, perhaps I should say. And it's basically an anonymous question and answer platform, but in many cases, people are using it to ask really nasty questions of one another. And in fact, several teen suicides have been linked to that app. As a result, Ask.fm has rolled out some very proactive moderation and safety policies to try to address that. So what about our good friend Yik Yak? Well, Yik Yak has also found that it is maybe not the greatest of ideas to, hand out a blank bathroom wall and tell people to write whatever they want on it. Recently, Yik Yak has begun using something called geofencing to prevent high school and middle school students from using it. You can still basically say whatever you want on Yik Yak, but they want to keep it to the adults, basically. They've also started displaying a warning, which some of you may have seen, whenever you type a word like bomb or like a phone number into a message. If you type a yak like that, a pop-up will appear and it will tell you that you should quote unquote pump the brakes and think about what you're going to post, which is like a great reminder for life in general. Could Yik Yak do more? Yeah, probably. But this is an issue we're still kind of working through and figuring out. So I'll be very curious to hear what you all think about that, both during the question period to follow and in the yaks that I suspect a few of you are composing right now. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, VMI. We can do better than that. We need to fill this room with a little bit more energy. Good afternoon. Much better, much better. Thank you for having me today. Social media, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It sounds like a little bit like a dramatic episode of House of Cards, doesn't it? And I'm not too ashamed to admit that I spent this entire last weekend doing absolutely nothing else than binge watching the last 13 episodes of House of Cards, and it's really good. I won't give you any spoilers. But that, of course, is the title of our panel today, and when I think of those words, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think about the larger themes that it really represents, which is social media good or is social media evil? And there's a lot to unpack there, and I don't think it's so much about whether social media itself is good or evil, but it really gets to the heart if people are good or evil. And there's a lot of examples all around us, every single day, all around the world about good and evil. In large part because of social media, because of the never-ending news cycle and information cycle. And there's a lot of examples that I've seen just yesterday about evil. I saw a report that in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, that Facebook is actually being used to traffic wild animals. That if you are in Malaysia, you can actually go on Facebook and you can buy an orangutan. I would venture to guess this is actually even happening with human trafficking. That is evil. But I want to spend a few minutes thinking about the hopeful side of social media, because there's absolutely a lot to think about that is hopeful about social media, and I am. So I want you to think for a minute about the charities or causes that you support on social media and why that's the case. Perhaps you like the ASPCA, or you liked a post that triggered a $1 donation to a cause. Maybe you even participated in the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. How many of you did that? Absolutely. I did too. My favorite are the celebrity examples of people doing the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. Have you seen some of them? My absolute favorite is Oprah, where you see Oprah, being dramatic Oprah, taking the bucket over her head, and then you can hear her best friend Gail in the background saying, "Is it cold?" Well, of course it's cold, Gail. It's the Ice Bucket Challenge. But that is a real example of social media being used for social good. And I want to share with you, in this context, some of the examples of how that is happening. So I'm going to share with you some examples from research that my center, the Center for Social Impact Communication at Georgetown University, has discovered because it's happening. So my first reason for hope for social media is that social media creates philanthropists of us all. Philanthropy is no longer about having $1 million to donate to the charity of your choice. Every one of you who raised your hand that did the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, you are a philanthropist thanks to social media. Any of you that like a cause on Facebook, you are a modern day philanthropist thanks to social media. And our research backs this up. 78% of the people that we talk to in our research say that supporting a charity through social media makes them feel like they are making a difference. Certainly there is a question about whether that difference actually resonates with the cause that they're supporting. Our research showed that there still is this notion that giving money or volunteering is more impactful than liking a charity on social media. But social media really has democratized this idea of philanthropy, that we all can be philanthropists. Reason two is that social media drives offline action. Is that our research showed that more than half of survey respondents who engaged with causes on social media have been inspired to take further action. So instead of just liking a page on social media, they went further than that. They made a donation to the ASPCA. They donated food or clothing to a shelter of their choice, or they went to an event that actually benefits that organization. But the thread running through all of that, what enabled them to do that, was the information that they got on social media, that social media actually drives offline action. And it really brings us all together to learn about these causes, doesn't it? And that's what our research shows as well, that the number one way now that people are finding out about charities is through social media. And that may not sound that surprising, but let me pause on that for a minute. That is the number one source of information versus interpersonal connections, versus the person sitting next to you telling you about that organization. And the charities that are talked about most on social media, our research revealed, you might find this interesting. The number one was animals, and a number two at a close second was children. So to me, I think that proves that once and for all, the internet has been made for cat and kid photos. So you can imagine what happens. I have a cat. I actually have a hairless cat. So you can imagine when I post a photo of my hairless cat with my 3-year-old nephew, what happens? Chaos. The third reason for hope about social media for social good is that social media is an influence accelerator. And what I mean by that is there's a new currency at play in the digital world, and that is you. That is your personal influence to enable other people, your friends, your family members, your loved ones, to care about what you care for. It's really extending these networks to such a large extent. And so our research proves that as well, that one of the number one motivators as to why people support organizations through social media is because they want to be shown as or feel as if they're influential to others in their network. Again, it's still showing that donations and volunteerism actually have the most impact in these people's minds, but what we see with the research is this notion of influence, that all of us have this currency of influence that we really can use, that's increasing by leaps and bounds, and I think that's going to continue. So to me, it really comes down to rethinking this notion of good and evil, that yes, social media can be used for good and evil, but it's a choice. This is not good or evil. We have the power of persuasion, each and every one of us, through the power of social media, to use it for good, to support the organizations that we care about, and to enable others to do the same. And so it really becomes, whether social media is good or evil, it comes down not to this, but rather to this, the human brain, and whether we're going to connect it with the heart, the human heart, the seat of love and compassion. And that's up to all of us. Thank you.
How y'all doing? You know, guys, you're much more intimidating in a big crowd like this when I only have 10 or 12 or 20 of you in my classroom. So this is quite an experience, so show mercy, right? I show mercy on you guys once in a while, often as well. So thank you all for coming to the roundtable discussion on the impact of social media. So I have created this role today for me to talk about how social media and the internet have changed the nature of contention and collective forms of political participation outside institutional venues. So I'm not here to talk about electoral or interest group politics, but rather about protest and movement activism. So in short, does the internet get people on the street or not? So a dominant narrative of the Arab Spring was that the protest was sparked and facilitated by internet access. So we all remember the images of people on Tahrir Square with their cell phone, texting and communicating, sharing information about how the protest is going. Thus, the observation on the impact of social media on protests is very much influenced by these recent events. But practitioners, as well as the academic community, acknowledge that social media and the internet as a mass communication device are able to reach a wider audience and much more rapidly. Assertions that these new technologies are revolutionizing protests still remains contested. So I'm not an ethicist. And I'm not here to make a normative argument about the good and the bad of social media in terms of understanding protests, because honestly, I don't think we can engage in a debate unless we know what we're talking about. So I want to just unpack a little bit how we can understand protests in the first place, and then maybe trying to figure out how social media fits into that. So this is what I'm going to do for the next couple of minutes. So in order to understand how social media impacts contention, it is first necessary to understand all these many factors that academic scholarship has identified to influence various forms of collective action. So let's look at them. First of all, most protests and social movement activism has an offline component, as previous speakers has pointed out. That is to say that the environment it is operating within, the socio-political society, the political system at large, matter. And within this political environment, several set of actors determine whether or not a protest will take place or how it will evolve. So the role of elites, therefore, is crucial. A group that can capitalize and or create disunity among the ruling elites, such as a split between regime hardliners and softliners, and can gain influential allies, increases its chance to mobilize and gain momentum. So here the internet with its reach can indeed create allies previously inaccessible for offline movements, especially the formation of transnational networks, crossing national boundaries. However, at the same time, a group can garner support, it may also give rise to the formation of groups with opposing viewpoints, or so-called counter-movements, right? As many friends you may make on Facebook, you may also create a couple of foes, or in general when you're moving in the internet realm. So while some may argue that this is a reflection of healthy deliberation, it nevertheless impedes a group's ability to sustain its mobilization because it is now competing among all these various actors out there in the space, in the internet space. So a powerful opponent, such as the state, for example, could in addition to that resort to different forms of repression to inhibit mobilization. Here, optimists like to point out that the various new online forums for deliberation and that they enable the circumvention of repression, while pessimists insist that issues of censorship, online monitoring, collecting personal data, the manipulation of these online forums operate quite similarly online as they do offline, and thereby greatly impacting any degree of participation. So beyond the political environment, a group willing to engage in any form of collective activities needs resources. First and foremost, collective contention hinges on a certain number of participants. Social media as a mass communication technology has the potential to reach more people and therefore augment a group size. However, in order to be reached through social media, an individual needs to be online and to be able to navigate this sphere skillfully. Again, optimists point to the inclusivity of the internet, while skeptics have been able to illustrate through various studies, like Van Leer's on protest movements in Belgium, that a group's composition actually remains rather homogeneous and is usually comprised of already active and politically aware supporters. So you're not necessarily attracting that much of a new diverse crowd. From an organizational point of view, the internet does seem to be conducive to allow for the formation of more non-hierarchical, decentralized, and participatory groups, which also affects then the utilization of other resources. I think we can all agree, for example, that office space no longer be as crucial, and that along with the cost-efficient dissemination of information, the amount of financial resources needed could probably be reduced. Or if you still need financial resources, that the acquisition through these financial resources online by clicking on donation site certainly makes things easier. In terms of moral resources, and here I'm thinking about the idea of legitimacy and credibility, we need to be aware that spaces of deliberation attracts a variety of actors, and therefore it is often difficult to ascertain whom among the cacophony of voices to trust. And tying this back to the state's role and its ability to repress, studies on networked authoritarianism have illustrated that states can be active in the internet arena and take advantage of the anonymity to distribute false information and to discredit certain activists and their causes. Which brings me essentially to the point of individual motivation. The drive, in combination with all the previous factors discussed, ultimately determines whether people participate in protest activity. So while some are motivated by grievances, frustrations, and anger, others act upon a sense of common identity with a group or out of empathy. One of the most challenging questions regarding the impact of social media is whether it can create any of these motivations or only facilitates people's ability of self-discovery and awareness, and who then may be able to identify their peers online. So in other words, to what extent do people replicate their offline networks online? Or to phrase it differently, is the internet just a mirror of everyday interaction, an echo chamber, or can it indeed create a unique online community? Oops. So, the importance of these group identities, networks, personal ties matter especially when calculating the risks and benefits associated with participating in protest activities. While the internet has produced certain forms of activities exclusively operating online, all forms of collective activity have to deal with the collective action dilemma. The situation that despite the prospect of collective benefits, the individual costs associated with a certain action makes participation in a collective enterprise highly unlikely. So in other words, why should an individual engage in risky behavior, especially in the face of repression as previously discussed, if she can benefit from a public good, such as a successful protest, produced by others? Hacktivism or hacking, therefore, may constitute the only form of internet-based activism that can circumvent this collective action dilemma. but only because it may be less of a collective endeavor than it is actually an individual activity. So a single hacker can successfully, on her own, generate a certain collective good or bad, and in many cases does not rely on others to succeed. So in essence, the internet may be attracting a certain type of individuals and facilitate a certain type of behavior, as kind of alluded to by the first speaker. Another aspect to keep in mind is the nature and the potential of participants' commitment to a cause, and how this may affect a movement's longevity. As you all know, if you're a regular user of social media, which in this generation I'm just going to assume, we constantly receive solicitations to support various causes. But by having expressed support, maybe through donations or signing an online petition, we do not necessarily extend our commitment beyond a few minutes or clicks on the internet. So again, the question, tying that to the previous speaker, is how much do you really change your online versus offline behavior? So I think at this point, I believe I give everyone enough to ponder about, and I will end my little expose on how social media may impact protest activity in terms of its ability or inability to alter various factors relevant for protest. So I guess I'm looking forward to the discussion, and thank you all for your attention.
All right, great. Well, what I'm going to do is just pose a question to each, just a clarifying question to each speaker, and then we'll open it up to the to all of you. First, to Caitlin, you know, you mentioned you talked a lot about anonymity, and we know this is a it's not an entirely new phenomenon, but it's ratcheted up exponentially with the possibilities of the internet. Here's the thing. Why don't we just say to Yik Yak or to the comment roles on newspapers, why don't you just say no anonymity? You know, you want, if you're going to open your mouth, then put your name behind your words. Stand up. You know, be a man, be a woman, and go ahead and identify yourself if you want, especially for those who want to insult or denounce. You know, if you're not, then you're just a coward or a weasel. Why don't we just say that to them?
So I actually think, is my microphone on?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
I actually think that's the absolute last thing we want to do. You know, as I tried to discuss in my talk a little bit, you know, anonymity is a tool, and it can certainly be used to terrible ends, but it can also be a powerful tool for expression. For instance, you know, people who, for whatever reason, aren't comfortable speaking out under their real names, maybe it's because they, you know, did I do that? You know, maybe it's because they've been marginalized by society because of the particular social group that they belong to. Maybe they're just like shy and don't want people to not laugh at their joke. You know, there are a lot of really important reasons why people should be allowed to be anonymous. So an interesting platform where we've seen this debate play out is actually Facebook. As you may know, Facebook has a very strict, unyielding rule as to using your real name. It does not matter if you are an author who uses a pen name, you must use your real name on Facebook. If you are a performer who uses a stage name, you must use your real name on Facebook. If you are a victim of stalking or harassment or domestic violence and you use a pseudonym in order to hide from your abuser, you still must use your real name on Facebook. And obviously that's one instance where we see there are really serious harms when you require that people not be anonymous and that they use their real identities.
Very good. Okay, okay. Okay, John, you know, at the end of your talk, you held up the cell phone and you said, this is not good or evil. In other words, the tool, it's a tool. It's neutral. It's what we do with it. Now, I'll be honest, that strikes me as too benign a conception of this thing because, one, it has incredible power, right? The computing power of that iPhone is greater than the computing power of those first capsules that went into space, right, in the early 60s. It's extraordinary what they can do. So on that sense, the powers unleashed by this tool is extraordinary. And the other thing is, these tools become tremendously meaningful to people. I mean, if you want to ruin a 17-year-old's life, right? You're on that too much. I'm taking it away. Oh, you've destroyed my life. This is. I mean, they become so personal. I mean, the selfie, right? Right. The selfie is what you can now walk around with 200 pictures of yourself in your pocket at all times. This is something that we couldn't understand. I actually told my wife the other day that I want her to write on my tombstone, "Never took a selfie." That's my goal. She just, when I say this, she just shakes her head. So, but I mean, but what do you? Is this just? I mean, it's a neutral, powerful tool, and people just are projecting. The tool itself, what do you think?
Well, social media, whether that be an iPhone or otherwise, they're incredibly powerful tools. I will be the first one to admit that, and that's not the purpose, I think, of what I was trying to get across exactly. It's absolutely powerful. But to say that social media or an iPhone itself is the thing that does awful things in the world is at once giving it too much credit, I think, and too much blame. It's taking the responsibility away from each and every one of us, because it's what's in our mind that translates into action within social media, I think, that we need to hold people accountable for, and not the technology itself. And as a side note, you were mentioning selfies, and I saw an interesting statistic the other day. Apparently, selfies kill more people than shark attacks. But if you stop and think about that, it's not the selfie itself that kills these people, right? It's the stupid people taking
step out in the road, right?
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
That's right. So selfies, powerful. Selfies themselves are not the killer. It's human beings.
Okay. Yeah, I read the other day that in London they wrap the poles on the street with rubber because too many people are going like this. In China, they have lanes. In some of the cities, they have lanes in the sidewalk for texters. You have to stay in your lane while you text. Okay. I'm going to ask you if you want to answer your questions. The one question you had was, regarding the more extreme behaviors, I think your question was, does the internet attract a certain type of individual? Does it?
Well, studies are inconclusive about this, but there have been some probing studies, at least in the field of contention, that actually illustrate it does not necessarily, it can attract a wider crowd, but the way groups form online often seems to be replicating who would you most likely also associate with offline. So in that sense, if people make the argument that the internet is this big democratizing tool and diversifies crowds and influences crowd behavior in that sense, I'm rather skeptical about that. I guess that sort of answers the question.
Good. Okay. All right. Gang, questions for our panelists? We have some roving microphones here. Hand in the air right here.
All right. Dr. Hoare?
Yeah?
I've had you in class.
Yeah?
What can you tell me, like, why was the revolution in Egypt, the Facebook revolution, why was that successful, whereas you don't see that same kind of thing in, like Iran or Turkey or wherever else?
Well, that's a great question. I do think it was successful in the sense because I'm not saying that social media does not have no impact whatsoever. I mean, the fact that they could reach a lot of people simultaneously at a certain time could create definitely a certain momentum. But is that the only factor that explains why it's successful? I don't think so. I mean, if you look at some of the preconditions, right, there were grievances. The UN report the year previous to that, when it was breaking out, was saying that Egypt had one of the worst poverty problems in the region compared to a lot of other countries. So there were definitely political, economic grievances. People were upset about the repressive regimes. The fact that you had defectors, like a former police officer who helped facilitate writing a book about how to take on the Egyptian regime, probably raised a certain amount of awareness. That he then turned that information also over to the internet probably helped in disseminating that information. Did it help, for example, that the neighbor Tunisia also had a revolution going? Definitely, but do you see where I'm coming from? There's a lot of factors going on. Social media adds fuel to the fire, I believe that. But can it definitely change the motivation of people? I'm not necessarily sure, because what you could see is, once the Mubarak regime decided to take the internet down, there were some stepping stones and some barriers that the protesters had to overcome. But luckily for them, the momentum was already there. So it didn't influence the fact that the regime tried its repressive tactics and took the internet down. But if you would like to compare that to maybe modern day China, I do think the Chinese regime is rather clever in trying to anticipate potentially protests in the future, and thereby already being proactive in regulating the internet usage to a certain extent. So I could leave here, I could keep talking, whatever.
Great. Question?
I have a question for Caitlin. How anonymous do you think people are, considering how easy it is for hackers to dox almost anyone?
That's a good question. So I think we're talking about slightly different things, right? I mean, I'm thinking specifically sort of like anonymous platforms where you can operate with large groups of people without using your real name. What you are talking about is very, very relevant in our current atmosphere, particularly since doxing seems to have emerged as a kind of political tool. I mean, people are doxing left and right. I wrote a column last year because Donald Trump doxed one of his opponents by like reading his phone number on stage. So I think you raise a really good point. There are always limits to your anonymity. You are always leaving certain types of traces online unless you maybe have a background in computer science and are being enormously savvy to cover your traces. And that's true with Yik Yak as well, right? I mean, people make like bomb threats there because they think they're absolutely anonymous. Well, no, when you registered for the app, you gave Yik Yak your phone number. So if needed, those messages can be traced back to you. So yeah, you raise a really good point, and there's a lot of sort of like politics and identity politics caught up in that, right? Like the person who controls your identity is the person in power, and by staying anonymous, you retain that power. When someone doxes you, they sort of take control of that. So I would definitely exercise caution whenever you think you're totally anonymous.
So my question is, most social media platforms don't appear to simply want to form a tribe of people with same interests or communication. It's really about get enough followers or enough users in order to incentivize the platform. As social media becomes more incentivized, how do you think consumerism is going to shape the ethical behavior of its users?
Who's that question for? Do you want to?
Yes.
Any? Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting that you brought that question up because I had a similar question formulating in my mind when you gave your presentation about how we all can now become philanthropists. But isn't that maybe also just a different type of consumerism, right? Like clicking on donation platforms online to make yourself feel better does not constitute the same type of philanthropy than actually really doing it sort of out of empathy. So I always wonder that myself, if we're not just creating a certain type of consumerism and users, it becomes a product that people consume, and if you're not playing along, then you're losing out in the race. Actually, one of my students in my social movement class asked me the other day, so does that mean if a movement or a protest group is not able to take anything online, does that mean they're going to be considered losers? Can they not build up the same credibility or legitimacy because they're not up to date? Will they always be outpaced by those countries and movements that have the technology available? So I find that kind of an interesting and something I think we should be cautious about. That there is maybe the potential for the internet, instead of making everybody equal, to actually accentuate power differentials. Sorry. Yeah. I don't know whether you want to.
Well, I think as it relates to what I was talking about, there's a lot of different definitions of philanthropists. And this is not to say that those that have deep pockets shouldn't be giving money. And it's not to say that people who don't have money, who like a cause, are doing it just to make themselves feel good. There is a lot of research that shows that their heart is in the right place for the same, for that same kind of action. So I don't think it's an either or situation. I see it more of an and that makes me encouraged that the individual does have that ability to play a role in the world of social impact, perhaps where they weren't able to play before, or in fact that it's accelerated thanks to social media. It's not to disregard what happens in person, you know, in terms of volunteering for a cause or what have you, but it's a new form of currency that people have, I think, thanks to social media.
Let me say something, picking up on John, just the acceleration factor. And Sarah, you mentioned the consumption patterns, the incentivization. One of the damaging aspects of social media, in very broad sense, that I see, especially for young people, is precisely that accelerated consumption. Okay? You watch someone online, the browsing, the movement, the commenting, it's very fast. And the problem with this, I mean, you know, the young people with a cell phone of some kind, they run up about 3,500 text messages a month on average. They still do about 250 phone calls a month on the cell phone. They run the TV often in their room and the stereo while they're doing the other things. So there's a lot of multimedia streams coming in. And the danger, I'm an English teacher, and so I'm teaching students to, read modernist poems or Emily Dickinson poems. I'm teaching them to do cultural work, listening to great music. And that requires a different orientation. You can't do that fast. You can't communicate quickly about that. The Emily Dickinson poem, you gotta slow down. You gotta look at those individual words very carefully. They have different levels of meaning. She's chosen that word, is right, that's a dense metaphor. Or the other day I was doing T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, and there's a quotation in The Wasteland from the opening of the libretto for Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde. I played for them the first couple of minutes of Tristan in the overture, and it's slow, there's a lot of silence, there's something funny going on with this opening chord that Wagner doesn't actually resolve until the last note in the whole opera 4 hours later. To take that in, it's a work of absolute genius. Only a genius could have written that music. To take that in, you've got to stop, settle yourself, slow down. When in Alfred Hitchcock's film Vertigo, the man follows the woman around the city, there's no dialogue for a while. It's very slow movement. It takes about 12 minutes. You can't take that in if you've been acclimated to an accelerated digital consumption, accelerated consumption of any kind. And so that aesthetic experience, or that intellectual experience, it's harder to get students to orient their minds to just having that. That's what I see. So.
This is for Dr. Bauerlein. I've found that when you're speaking to all of us as an audience, that you're saying the younger kids and that it's risky for us to use social media in the ways that we do. But I find that you're kind of grouping us all in one stereotype almost, whereas you were just talking about taking the time to read something that you need to slow down. I'm a big reader personally. I love classical music, everything like that. And it just seems almost arrogant in a sense to group us like that. And I'm just wondering... Check. I have one more thing. Make sure to check Yik Yak after this, guys. Sir, I was wondering, what is your thesis argument for the book that you wrote about our generation? Because I'm sure we would like to hear that as a whole.
I've been booed a lot on college campuses, so you know that's to be expected. You guys aren't representative. A VMI student is not going to be representative of your generation. This is an unusual place, and only unusual people are going to survive here. Now, the stereotype aspect is based upon population data. So when we have population data from the Census Bureau come in saying that 62% of 18 to 24-year-olds didn't read any book on their own in the preceding 12 months. Okay? It's a huge number. When we see that SAT reading scores are at their lowest level in 40 years, that says something. Or that SAT writing scores, SAT added a writing component in 2006, scores have gone down every single year except 2 years when they were flat. It's so bad that the College Board has just decided to make the writing component optional. All right? The international comparisons, we look awfully bad. So these are generalizations. They're based upon the survey data. So you're talking about a whole group. And so when you see things going like this, you draw the conclusion, realizing, of course, that, look, we've got about 20% of your age group that is extraordinary. They pile up all the AP courses, they do volunteer work over the summer, they do internships, they compile a resume that would have blown me away when I was that age. But when we also look at the high school survey of student engagement and find that 57% of high school students do less than 1 hour of homework a week. Okay? 57, more than half of them do a week, less than 1 hour. When we look at the national survey of student engagement, which is of college students do half as much homework today as they did 40 years ago. Okay? And grades have gone significantly upward. In 1960, 15% of college grades were A's. the most common college grade was a C. The scale made sense, right? You had a bell curve on the scale. Today, you know what I'm going to say. The most common, 45% of all college grades are A's. The scale is like this, okay? Yes. Now, VMI, different place. I know that, okay? But it's not, these are generalizations. And generalizations aren't, they can be arrogant if you don't have the goods, if you don't have the data on things. More than 40% of college students today have to go into remedial courses in freshman year. Go look at what employers say about recent college graduates. They're furious. Okay? And when you compare how employers rate college graduates and how college graduates rate themselves, do you know that 70%, close to 70% of college students rate themselves above average intellectually? That's statistically impossible. Okay? So these are the things that I draw from, recognizing that of course there are that small cohort that is an exception. When we get out of that 20% and we look at things like hours of homework time, things go down very, very quickly. And that's not healthy for a democracy, right? We can't survive on just a top 20% doing things well. So.
Can I have a follow-up question, maybe to back up the comment? So when you say that a college student spend less time engaging in their homework activity, kind of to play the devil's advocate and maybe to defend my students, couldn't it be also that they're saving some time because of the social media? They don't have to climb into the library's back rooms like I had to do and actually grab a physical book and encyclopedia, because to a certain extent, certain information is just much more easily available, which cuts the cost of accessing information. Also, I have one more. Also, when you're comparing the deficit in the standardized testing results in the US with European countries or Asian countries, I don't think that their kids necessarily spend less time on social media. Actually, with the Asian culture, they do celebrate social media probably even much more than the American culture, and yet they can get the test scores that you were referring to. So I'm not sure whether it's all going to be because of media and social media. There may be some other factors that we may have to address if we're talking about educational performance, which is outside of this panel to a certain extent.
Here's the problem with that. College graduates today are not getting stronger scores or stronger ratings than college students did before the digital age.
But
if they are getting, if you've got more A's given, that's not because the students are doing more work or being more efficient. It's because of grade inflation.
Well, because we're turning our universities and enterprises, and we're feeding into consumerist behavior, to go back to the comment that the gentleman did above that. So I'm just thinking we're moving away from the discussion we should actually have. It's not about education, and well, anyway. So.
I would like to piggyback on that. Now, granted, I don't have a PhD, so please take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I could not disagree with you more vehemently on this issue. I think first off, many of the trends you're describing, their relationship with social media is correlative. It's not causative. We have absolutely no evidence that this so-called shallowness of student activity or education or any of these things has anything to do with their activity on the internet. And in fact, I would counter that students are being quite brilliant and quite inventive and creative on the internet in ways that would boggle the minds of the prior great generations. I mean, maybe a lot of people in this room don't want to sit down and spend 20 hours reading the Odyssey or what have you, but they can do things on social media that people of an older generation absolutely cannot. And in many cases, those things are quite impressive, quite intellectual, and quite creative, as I said. So I think just because something is new, just because behaviors and practices of expression are new, is not a reason to assume that they are intellectually less worthy or less rigorous. And I also don't think there's any VMI exceptionalism going on. I'm sure you guys use social media exactly as your generation does, and it's totally healthy and normal, and I wouldn't fault it.
Yeah. I'll just say, that's not what employers say. That's not what law schools. That's not what law schools say. Law schools are having to hire writing people. Medical schools are having to hire in-house writing instructors because so many are going in, and people are going into medical school and law school who can't write. Now, Caitlin, you say spending 20 hours reading the Odyssey. The Odyssey is one of the foundational works of Western civilization. All right? This is every single young person should read the Odyssey. One thing, it's everywhere. It's the great journey story. All right? So, this is something that was a foundational work for Greek culture. Every Greek child knew those events in the Odyssey. So, spending 20 hours reading the Odyssey is a crucial activity for young people. So,
I don't think it's an either-or situation. Yeah. Why can't you read the Odyssey and also tweet about it afterwards? I don't think there's...
You can. Look.
And while I'm sure you have a point that maybe writing skills or things of that nature are going on, there are a vast array of factors in the educational system and otherwise that could explain a decrease in writing skills that have absolutely nothing to do with the internet. It's just easiest to blame the internet.
There actually are studies of high social media usage correlated with low academic scores in college. There actually are that. Two, there are actually
correlating.
One of the findings of the book of the year in education 2011 was Academically Adrift. What it found was the students who perform the best are those who do the least collaborative homework. Those who do homework mostly by themselves, not through social media, collaboration, asking questions, writing about it, by themselves. They actually got higher scores on the CLA. So I just don't, the data aren't there for this.
But as you said, it's correlation, it's not causation, and that's why I have to agree.
There are strong correlations and weak correlations.
Sure, we all know
strong
about statistically significant results.
Reach a point. There was, do you know that in research on cigarette smoking and lung cancer, that began as simply correlations rising to the level. Because most people who smoked didn't get lung cancer. actually. 13% of smokers got lung cancer. Now, in epidemiological terms, that's a huge number, okay? But it's a correlation, and that's what built up that research. So strong correlations are something we should pay close attention to. All right, all right. There and then there. There and then there.
Hey, sir. All right. Quick question. So if we're talking about all these problems that you're perceiving, I think that's well and good, but I think as cadets, you know, at an analytic institution that value engineering and numbers, what are your plans to actually fix these problems that you think are affecting us as a whole?
I'm sorry, I missed the first, I was looking over here, I missed the first part.
Oh, that's okay. So my question is, you know, we're cadets at a, you know, primarily, you know, 50% STEM school. Not a STEM major myself, but I value numbers and solutions to things. And you're identifying some problems that we understand that you think are very passionate about, but I think for us, you know, we'd actually like to hear solutions rather than, you know, just simple discourse about a subject.
Right.
But we do need to talk about them, right? Unless you really understand what's going on, which you probably only discover through deliberation, then there's no point of making any hasty policy recommendation or throwing some wishy-washy half-research solutions at you. So maybe we should do the first step. Apparently there is a lot to discuss here.
Back over here now.
Yeah, but before addressing it, you got to clarify the problem, right? And I think that, yeah, the STEM, 50% here are STEM. That's actually a huge percentage for colleges in general here. I mean, I have solutions to this. Okay, read more books. Read more history. You know, just spend, let's bring down the social media time and let's bring up the book reading time. You know, I have people say, you know, what do you do with your son? You know, my son goes on video, he plays some video games, he's 10 years old. I'm fine with that if we've got an hour of reading time, right? We maintain a critical mass of books. You know, we read basic versions of the Odyssey, the great stories about Greek gods and heroes. That's my simple solution. There are only so many hours in the day, and everything has opportunity costs. So for me, it's just trying to carve out more of an intellectual and a cultural life to, you know, bring down the social life. I mean, I regard youth culture as a burden for you, and it's something to escape, not something to indulge.
All right, I have a follow-up question over here. So you talk about law schools and your research you've done with law schools saying they have to hire writing teachers to help these students coming in because I guess they're in a format of always typing and writing their statements as if it's a text message. I'm interested in going to law school. I talk to law school professors and admissions people all the time, sometimes even on a weekly basis throughout the semester. What they're telling me is actually something different. What I've heard, and I want to hear what your response to this is that because of students are reading the Odyssey so much that they're coming in and they can't write simple declarative statements and they're being wrapped up in flowery prose and they can't actually get their point across because they're trying to be overly elegant. So they argue that actually social media, being able to write simple statements in a lot of situations is making their arguments much clearer and benefiting their overall performance in school.
You know, it is true that in the humanities classes, we don't emphasize sufficiently clear, straightforward, direct writing. For example, having students do summary papers instead of interpretative papers, because in law, in science, in business, most of the writing you will do is summary writing. You know, in a medical report, in a clinical study, clinical studies begin with a literature review. And what does that mean? You read existing literature on the topic, recent studies and findings, and you simply summarize them. Okay? Yeah, and there, in science, law, there is that problem. We don't have people who can simply say what this says here in nice condensed form. I concede your point on that.
Sir, yesterday General Alexander mentioned that the top 10 jobs today didn't exist 10 years ago, and he pointed out that today we're training for jobs that currently don't even exist. So in light of this, like, how can you demonize using social media and new technology, because jobs in the future will not be traditional jobs that we've known, but new things that we may not even see yet?
Well, I think that in areas, again, of science, for instance, and business, those old writing skills are going to obtain even in new kinds of jobs. Now, in terms of the top jobs, I'm going to give you a resource that you might all look at. It's something put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics called the Occupational Outlook. And they talk there about what is the job market for, look in the next 10 years. One of the top ones is audiologist, speech therapist. These are exploding fields. Public health, exploding fields. But those jobs, they still demand those strong verbal skills that come with someone who's done a lot of reading. There's a very strong correlation between strong writing skills and heavy reading habits.
I'd like to point out really quick that some of the most fascinating work going on in the field of public health right now is using social media as a venue to reach vulnerable populations.
So right now, I'm right here, the other side, right here. So right now I'm actually doing research on how social media has negative effects on self-esteem. And one of the statistics is that 70% of 12 to 18-year-olds have negative self-esteem. And of those 70% of people, 50% of them attribute that negative self-esteem to social media. What do you guys think that the negative, or what the source of that is, and what solution do you pose for that issue?
I buy that. That's all I can say. I can perceive that there is a negative impact of media on self-esteem formation, definitely. Because, I mean, sorry guys, but I'm going to talk from a gendered perspective here. Given all the visual media images that are constantly thrown at women in contemporary society, I do understand where the self-doubt and the self-evaluation comes in. That's not to say that may not also be true for the males in this audience, but I'm not a male, so I can't speak from that perspective. What's your question? Should we have less media in order to raise self-esteem? Or, I don't know where the mic is, I can't see in this corner of the audience. Can I have a follow-up question to the one who's raising the question?
No, so I was just wondering what you thought the link to that was, what the issue is and what solution you pose for that issue.
I think the issue is, which has been illustrated by all three presentations, is that the internet as an information disseminator can spread information that obviously influences people's behavior in the good and the bad. If it's false information, if it's oversimplified, overemphasized information, all the visual images that you can find online, that they impact and that they potentially are used as reference points for the consumer, for the audience, for everybody in this space who is constantly going online and trying to reevaluate, reassess your own self-performance, your own self-worth. because you think your peer is out there as well, then obviously that kind of makes sense in that. I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm personally not surprised by your finding.
I would say much of the media that young people use is really an invitation to narcissism. You remember the motto of YouTube? The original motto of YouTube is in the corner. Broadcast yourself. Okay? Show who you are. Facebook is presenting your best self. The selfie phenomenon. These are modes of self-presentation, self-absorption. And the thing about narcissism is that it is superficially a mode of self-esteem, but narcissists' self-esteem is very fragile. It takes very little for a narcissist's self-esteem to collapse. And I think in the social media world, people can, in terms of self-presentation to others, they can be pretty vulnerable because you've got responses coming. And I mean, narcissism is a curse for people, as all of you know, because you know the story of Narcissus. So.
But not everybody who is having a fallout from the constant impact of social media is necessarily a narcissist. Just because I have issues with my self-confidence, that doesn't mean I'm a narcissist, because I'm trying to, I think what's naturally in human being, to look up to your peers and get social cues from your peers, to falsely apparently use a reference point to then evaluate myself. I don't understand what that has to do with narcissism.
Well, the social science data on this, and the best person on this is someone named Jean Twenge. You can read, she has a good book called Generation Me, is that if you look at personality tests for young people, narcissism rates have gone up significantly in the last 30 years.
Sir? Cadet Dylan Ray Angelo Blackburn Jones. You could find me on Facebook over here. Dr. Bauerlein. So I have a couple points, and I want to see what your points are against this. Earlier you said that social media can be used as a tool, and for example, you said it could hurt a 17-year-old. But like any other tool, a wrench, I could just beat that 17-year-old and use it whichever way I want. My second point is, earlier also you said something about how international college students performed better than the US college students. Personally, I've lived overseas for 15 years, lived in 5 different countries. Everyone uses social media. Everyone uses Facebook. Nothing changes. So probably it's just our economy at this state that's causing our college and education decline, where everyone else is fine.
Or it's just social inequality that puts people at different starting lines when they enter the educational system here in the US versus European countries. I mean, it could be just socioeconomic reasons and has nothing to do with internet usage.
Just on the international comparisons, there are 2 tests on this, the PISA exams and the TIMSS exams, as they're called. The US is way down. We're in the second half of developed nations. There are about 40 nations that are part of this. For instance, the bottom socioeconomic quartile in Singapore produces more high scorers than our top quartile, economically, our top socioeconomic number. So I would attribute the differences in Singapore, Finland, in South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Germany. These are probably to the curriculum and to the culture that emphasizes academic achievement across the board.
But now I have to I'm from Germany, so I lived through that system. And I personally, and I cannot back it up right now with statistics apparently, as I cannot pull them out of my pocket as frequently as you were able to do, and maybe I'm going way out of my comfort zone here, but having grown up in Germany, I do think maybe it has to do with the curriculum, but I honestly believe it has to do with the fact that socioeconomic background does not matter to the same extent. We have pre-K childcare where certain maybe initial seeds will be planted that then help students along the way later on. I mean, we're talking about a topic I don't really feel like should be part of this panel. It's not about educational policies. I know that you have done studies and you cited studies that media may have an impact on that, but as I think it has been pointed out by also my other female panelists, that there's so many confounding variables in this equation to really figure out what's wrong with the US educational system, that this is actually beyond the scope of this panel.
So I was just hoping to make a statement and then perhaps have y'all's opinion on it. As I've been listening to the conversation this evening, I've kind of basically thought that social media can be good, and I use it, and it is good. I get to connect with a lot of people. You know, lately I've heard about a friend who's like suffering from a sickness, but anything else. But I also can find myself wasting my time on it, right? I find myself like maybe just flicking through my Facebook page or Instagram or whatever, and it gets to a point where sometimes I waste time on it.
Sure.
And I've also realized as I've been in college, I have read less books, unfortunately, and I've realized where I've began to forget how to spell words that I have in the past. And I've honestly thought that effect of I haven't been reading as much. So at least a personal suggestion for me, and maybe a suggestion to Mr. Tonkinson's answer that he mentioned, or question that he posed earlier, is what is the solution? And I think the solution comes down to moderation, because sometimes we can waste time, and sometimes we don't spend enough time educating ourselves. But having a healthy balance of being on social media and also spending 15, 20 minutes a day, maybe even, to read that book before we go to bed, or what have you. So we're kind of accessing both points. But maybe if you guys have any opinion on that, that'd be nice.
I agree.
Amen.
So this one's kind of for all of you. Earlier you said that online we are grouping together with like-minded people, that we are grouping together with people that we are very similar to, and that's causing problems within our country. Yet anonymity creates a whole new discourse community within the entire environment around us. Yet we are drawn to that anonymity. We are naturally drawn to that. That goes against what you were saying earlier. Why do you think that is? What's causing this draw, this attraction to that discourse community?
The anonymity issue? Well, you can say things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to say. Anonymously, you're not accountable for what you say. You know, and you know, we have impulses. I believe in original sin. We have impulses toward our lesser natures, and anonymity allows us to indulge those, certainly more than if you have to put your name on something. You put your name on something, you better be ready to have people come back at you. So.
But anonymity also empowers you, as you were saying, to engage with discourse communities you would absolutely be unable to engage with otherwise. This is the reason I personally like anonymous apps, and some of you might sympathize with this. Personally, I'm extremely introverted. I'm shy. In college, I sat in the back of the room and was like never one to raise my hand or anything. I'm never going to be the cool girl on Facebook who makes a post and gets 300 likes, right? But if you are in a community like Yik Yak, it's like there's an even playing field for everyone. You don't come into that with any sort of identity-based baggage or anything. Everyone has a say, and it's voted up or down purely on the merit of the sentiment that's expressed, right? And that's an extremely powerful thing. Anonymity isn't just about base instincts. It isn't just about being nasty to your neighbors. It's also about a very unique discourse community, just like you were saying, where everyone is sort of free and judged based on what they're saying, not merely who they are.
But how much is that equalizing? I mean, I'm thinking about the problem of information asymmetry here, right? how can you not be sure that even a platform like Yik Yak is actually behind the scenes, since you don't know who's posting, dominated by a certain type of a group that deliberately is steering the discussion on Yik Yak into a certain direction. I mean, here's the problem about any anonymous kind of sphere, right? While it is empowering and I understand the benefits, you have to be aware that you don't know with whom you're interacting. You have to make that calculation in terms of trust, in terms of credibility of the information that's being disseminated in these platforms. So ultimately, I guess to answer your question, you can do whatever you want to. You have to be just able to assess those risks correctly. And I'm not sure whether everybody really understands the risks. And that's, I think, potentially a problem.
You know, with the black students' protests last fall, Emory University had one of them. One of the top demands is that all students at the school be banned from using Yik Yak.
Hey, sir. John Wainwright. So this Luddite vein of thinking has existed, since the radio came out. People have been saying, this is the end of the world. People are going to stop thinking critically. And they've been right and wrong every single time. Why do you think you're right this time?
With every new change, right, there are people who are going to react, right, who think we're losing something important or we're unleashing something big. And you're right, they're right and they're wrong. This time, I think, is different, simply according to the digital age thinking about things, which says this is a revolution. This is a transformation in human communication. People compare it to the printing press or the invention of writing, even. And that means profound alterations in human contact, in the social sense, and that this is something I'm temperamentally conservative. And so, yeah, I'm cautious about what's been lost. And we're at an interesting threshold whereby pretty soon there will be no more people who have any living memory of a pre-digital time, right? A pre-computer's time. My generation is going to pass away. And so everyone will have grown up with these tools. And it is such a profound change that I think that does alter a very basic way what our inheritance is. I worry about the cultural inheritance being lost or diminished so much. But I mean, it's an open question. And so I am operating out of, who knows what this moment is really, what is really happening today? It's going to be 100 years before we really know. Someone once asked Mao Zedong what was the significance of the French Revolution, 150 years earlier. His response, too early to tell. Right? So, for me, it's just there are certain things that I know are being lost that I fear, and that is one, the bookishness, right there, one thing.
But why does it have to be either or? Why can it not, like the cadet pointed out earlier with moderation, why can it not be all? It's not that we have to limit ourselves to only the internet.
Well, right now, according to Kaiser Foundation, more data, young people consume 11 hours of media a day. 11 hours of media a day.
But do we ask them whether they maybe, thanks
Okay.
God goodness to the Project Gutenberg that puts books online. Do
So-
we know whether part of the social media activity online is not actually devoted to reading online?
Yeah, they do include reading in their numbers. TV, music, and so on, and reading. Reading is the only media that's gone down in Kaiser's reports. So people are only spending, I mean, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they only do about 11 minutes a day reading. That's far lower than what used to be. So that's the trend line.
I mean, people are reading vast amounts of information. They're just not reading them in a way that you appreciate or that are measured by the study.
It's not just how you're reading, it's what you're reading. Okay? So what we find, far fewer of they're reading text messages, more than 110 per day. Okay? Now, do you want to equate text messages to reading the newspaper? Newspaper reading, including online, is way down for young people. So.
Not at the Washington Post.
So what is the solution? Where does the solution start? Does it start at the family house where a mother and a father may be working 3 jobs and don't have time to sit down with a kid to read a book, which they should, I agree. I mean, I'm not saying that reading and writing skills, we can all agree, are transferable skills. You will need them whether you're on this side of the post or on the other side of the post. Where to start is the question, and here I come back to the argument I made earlier. It may have to do with the larger socioeconomic structures of this particular culture that does not allow for certain seeds to be planted early enough because parents are overworked, parents do multiple jobs at the same time. I don't know where it is, but I'm not necessarily only sure it has to do with media. It can have to do with media because a parent doesn't have the time and puts the iPod in front of the face of a 5-year-old, sure. But then it has to do with larger socio-cultural dynamics beyond just the narrow impact of social media.
That's right. That's blaming social media again for larger societal issues. There needs to be a shift in the conversation there. You're blaming social media for these big, intractable issues.
Yeah, I would enlarge it to include television watching. There's a strong correlation, television watching and academic performance. It's the full media menu. And one of the big disasters in this country is the single parent problem, because the single parent doesn't have the time or the energy to read to the child, to spend time talking with the child. Single parent homes have much higher TV watching and computer use than two parent households.
To Dr. John Tribus, you've been awfully quiet up there. You've talked in your little speech, you talked about how users feel good after supporting a cause on social media, but have you seen an actual effect of the causes because of social media?
Good question. And the answer is yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, there is research that is showing, the collection of audiences and their respective actions, whether that goes so far as to donate or to volunteer. That's absolutely on the positive side. But you're getting to the heart of a bigger question, right? It's not enough just for people to feel good about what they're doing on social media as it relates to a charity, but is it actually helping that charity at the end of the day? Is it actually helping to advance their mission? So again, in some cases, I would make the argument yes, but in some cases not. We were talking kind of about the private sector earlier. Private sector is smart. They're doing corporate social responsibility. They get a lot of the things that I'm talking about. They get that proof point after proof point shows that consumers are willing to buy a product if it has a so-called social impact benefit, that it says it's helping a charity, or that 25 cents is going to be donated to a charity. A lot of those companies' hearts are in the right place, and a lot of them are doing really innovative things that truly have a social impact, but there's also a lot that are not at the end of the day. And that's the difference. So there's both out there. I wish it were black and white. It's not. It's shades of gray.
Hello, sir.
Sir, I have a question. I just noticed that you continuously speak about the negative effects of social media, but I think you're overlooking the positive impacts that it has. And you said that employers in law and medical school keep turning away students because they can't write, but what about the employers that are looking for people that are tech savvy, like employers of charities and nonprofits that need people's attention to get the money that they need for their causes? Like Penn State always runs charities for raising money for cancer, but it's all over social media because they need that attention from the people. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I guess how you put it, type skills. Yeah, corporations are all on social media. Universities are all on social media as well. I mean, that's part of every platform now. Yeah. I mean, I don't have. I mean, I know the corporations bring in writing instructors in the private sector. They spend, a report a while back, they spend $3.1 billion a year on writing coaches to come in and show employees how to improve their writing. Also, when they ask employers about what are the deficiencies of younger workers, social media doesn't come up. What they're unhappy about is general verbal communication skills. Anyway.
If I can add for a minute, the number, from my study that I shared, the number one way that people find out about the charities that they support is because of social media. Number one way. It is so powerful from that perspective. And I think you also have to remember that, young people, all of you, all of us, we're living in a values-driven society. At once, where you could make the argument that values are driving away, at the same time, the notion of thinking about values as to where we want to work and what we want to do with our lives is absolutely increasing. And the large way that those type of individuals find out about the companies or charities that they want to go work for is absolutely because of social media. That backs up my first point.
Quick question, John. Does that include churches? People going to church, tithing each week?
Our study in particular did not look at churches.
Hello, sir. Sir, you mentioned that we're losing our bookishness as a society, but can't you say that we're... Sir, over here.
I'm looking.
Yeah. Can't you say that we're more informed as a society today than we ever have been before? And, we may not be able to memorize Shakespeare's 14th sonnet, but I can look it up on my phone right now in 15 seconds. I can look up one of Caitlin's articles, no problem. And when I'm scrolling through Facebook, I'm not only seeing the stupid crap my friends post, but I'm also seeing news articles and new technologies that are coming out, such as 3D printing. And going on a business trip or for pleasure, I can look up the do's and don'ts of just about any culture going on that trip. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's wonderful that can happen, right? And you can always look something up. You have more knowledge. You have the accumulated knowledge and materials of civilization available to you right there. Here's the thing. What what knowledge do you want to have up here, right? I mean, someone says to me a while back precisely that. Look, why memorize the Gettysburg Address? I can just look it up. And I say, because it's not just information. I mean, going to another country, learning, that's information. There are certain materials that are more than just information. They may have deep civic meaning for our country. The Gettysburg Address now has the status of a founding document, right? They should be part of your sensibility, right? You expose yourself to things, and you are very much a function of what you are exposed to, right? And what are the things that you want to make as part of you, right? What is going to be part of your character, part of your language, part of your sensibility, part of your taste? What are the things that you want to have in here as part of, the French word for education is formation, formation. These are things, the tools are fantastic for information, but if they substitute for the acquisition of those materials that are going to make you into a discerning citizen and a tasteful consumer, it's a substitution we can't allow to happen.
Can I ask you a follow-up, Mark? I'm curious about what you think then about the problem, and maybe we should actually have a biologist here or something like that, an evolutionary biologist. Are we not, I can't believe I keep playing the devil's advocate on the side of the cadets all afternoon long, but can it not be also, shouldn't it be maybe fair to the extent that to these newer generations, there's an incredibly task for them ahead, right? On the one hand, people like you would like to be satisfied if they're engaging with the past, and I understand where you're coming from. Meanings are important. You cannot really maybe engage in a debate if you don't even know the meanings behind certain words and the history of meanings and all of that. So on the one hand, we want them to all be able to do that, and at the same time, we want them to be adapt to modern technology and know all this information. I mean, I don't know, again, maybe a biologist out there, but I also think at one point we're reaching our kind of evolutionary capacity up here to really process all this flood of information, all these competing demands on what we are supposed to be able to produce, what we are supposed to be able to perform well in, and all of that. And at what point everybody takes shortcuts. Everybody falls into your heuristic devices to cues and weighs the costs and benefits about whether I'm spending 20 minutes on a book or only 10 minutes in a book, or 20 minutes on the athletic fields or only 10 minutes on the athletic field. I mean, we only have 24 hours in a day, and there seems to be an increasing demands on human beings. And at what point something gotta go, right? I mean, we're not superhumans. We can't do it all. We cannot satisfy everybody and every audience. So shouldn't we be fair to say, you need to just figure out what are the skill sets you need for whatever makes you happy and for the path you're going on, whether that includes skillfully navigating the internet arena or being able to say Shakespeare's sonnets by heart. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to believe I can, not be maternalistic or paternalistic, have trust in the young people, and maybe, hopefully, they figured out for themselves what they need, what skills they need in order to succeed out there. I don't know. I believe in you guys.
Well, and then perhaps it's getting into the larger question of the role of educational institutions, right? Because whether we like it or not, this is the world in which we're living in. How do our educational organizations and otherwise equip us all with making sense of that world and perhaps learning in a new and different way?
Incorporating maybe media into the learning of the traditional forms of writing and reading.
Virtual reality. I was just at Georgetown's virtual reality clinic a couple of days ago. If you guys aren't looking at virtual reality yet, you absolutely should be. It's incredible what you're able to do. I put on the Oculus glasses, and it literally was the solar system. I was moving around the solar system in a 360-degree capacity. They are looking at that technology right now for applications for educational benefit, and I think that's extraordinary.
Excuse me. Hello? I'm Matt Hoffman, and I wanted to just see if you guys could take this idea. Can't all of this our generation's infatuation with social media, as well as maybe an older generation's distrust of social media, all be explained by normal cultural trends? So the social media's negative impacts on education be part of a global trend instead of just, oh, well, this generation is bad. If that makes absolutely any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think you're articulating what the three of us have been, trying to make the case for during most of this debate, which is that most of the perceived harms of social media as far as education is concerned and things of that nature actually possibly have utterly no relation to social media or even to the quote-unquote failings of this generation.
That's actually not what I'm saying.
Oh, sorry, go on.
It could have an impact on our ability to learn. It's just our generation being brought up as we have in a time of prosperity without the need of having to, say, read the Odyssey or, use gardening tools very often. We haven't had to work for what we have, for our technology, for this ability to use the social media. And since in this prosperity, we have let our ability to adapt slip a little.
So what you're saying is that social media is a manifestation just of the current evolutionary cycle we are all in as humans, sort of in the long trajectory. Whatever was prominent 20 years ago, now this is prominent, and you're just asking whether that's happening on a global stage. Yeah.
Well, let me give another longer picture. We're engaged in for the last 100 years. The Western world has been engaged in a massive social experiment. And the social experiment is what we would just call the invention of adolescence. In 1900, the percentage of high school age Americans who were in high school was only 10%. Only 1 in 10 kids went to high school. Less than 1 in 100 went to college. Okay? Most kids left school between 4th and 8th grade, and they went to work. They worked on farms, they worked in factories, a lot of child labor at the turn of the century. They worked in sewing circles, in kitchens, delivery boys. They didn't have a social life. There was no teenage social world. They were under the direct administration of adults all the time. They played with each other a little bit each day or on weekends after the picnic or after church. Over the course of the first half of the 20th century, more and more kids stayed in school longer and longer. So that by the mid-20th century, we were about 70% of high school age kids were in high school, which meant we were putting young people in these close quarters, moving them around in groups of 25. They were eating together, they were doing gym class, showering together, doing sports together, after-school activities together. This is when you got a youth culture created in our country. This is when you got movies where people would talk about these kids and what is going on with them. Teenagers got their own idiom, their own movies, their own music. If you were 50 years old in 1956 and you said, hey, I really like Elvis, or in 1963 you said, hey, I love the Beatles, that would sound odd to young people. That was youth music. That was their world. What we got in the word of a great education researcher, James Coleman, was the adolescent society was created. You got peer pressure. There was no peer pressure in 1900 because you didn't have peers. Wait. Look, peers weren't interacting in close quarters enough to exert peer pressure on one another. It didn't happen. Why do you think that's not true? Someone answer.
Excuse me, sir.
Wait, World War I was 20, someone mentioned World War I. Those were not teenagers for the most part. They were older.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
They were past 18.
Okay.
Wait. So you could be 16 and go to World War I?
Yes.
And serve?
Yes, you could.
Is that...
This has been a pretty interesting panel. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to any of our graduates from Botetourt County Public Schools. So some of our panelists have brought up that social media is being used in instruction. We can attest to that. That is being used in our classrooms at the elementary, middle, and high school level. The reality is social media is not going anywhere. Social media has always been around. It's just digitized. And so the question at this point is, in the classroom, we try with limited funds, limited training, and limited time, with standards of learning, standardized testing, and everything else that lends itself to some of the things that you've been bringing up about how students can approach literature and express themselves verbally and also in writing. We've got some pretty tall tasks that we're trying to get through, but we're incorporating social media as a way to bring research and connect students to sources that they never would have been able to get to before. Students can now reach out at home and get help on homework from a content field expert, and that was facilitated on their own time and on their own technology. My question for you as the panel is, how do we either as educators or adults in this society better prepare the youth to use social media in more mature and appropriate ways? You're not going to get rid of the things that social media is ugly for, but we need to embrace what it's beautiful for and teach them how to better do that. What are your thoughts?
Does you guys want to, and then I'll give the negative.
Well, I would like to congratulate and thank you. I suspect that your students are emerging into the world much more prepared than the students in some other traditions of That said, I think one of the most important things you can teach your students in is digital literacy, how to evaluate the information that they're getting online, how to evaluate the source, how to evaluate its trustworthiness, those sorts of things. And that's an issue that we see a lot on my beat as far as people not being able to adequately evaluate the information that they're seeing online. I think it's also really important to instruct students in some of the psychology and sociology research that's out there as far as how certain internet environments might encourage them to behave in different ways and to maybe encourage some empathy training or those types of things. And just help them better understand what sorts of thought patterns that certain online platforms might be nudging them towards or away from, so that they can engage with those platforms a little more critically. But you're doing God's work, so thank you for that.
Maybe also contrast it to actually the traditional way of learning. I mean, how would you ever know what the good of the social media is if you don't actually explicitly show them the benefits of it? So if you're saying you're bringing research into the classroom to a certain extent because it would otherwise not be available for the student, if there are certain research that is available through the traditional way, I would say do it both ways. Show them how to do research online, but also take them actually to an archive. Take them through these old manuscripts that are physically lying around in some cellar. I mean, you have to do both, and you have to be able to do both in a certain way to appreciate potentially the one over the other, or to actually hopefully come to the conclusion that they complement each other. Instead of, again, it's an either-or thing.
Excuse me, sir, if I could get one last question in.
I suspect you all like this panel. You should also suspect that we kind of engineered it, that we'd get just a tiny bit of raucous controversy here. So please join me in thanking each and every one of our panelists today. Controversy are good things in my view. I really want to thank you for some great insights. I think we gained something all along the way with these different views. And so on behalf of General P, the staff and faculty and the Corps Cadets, thank you very much for coming, and just a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.